Here with Dr. Boyce Watkins. What's going on? How you doing?
Doing good, brother. How are you?
I'm good. So tell me, what brings you to New York?
Well, right now we're on the Black Economic Empowerment Tour. We are going to as many cities as possible to really talk about wealth building, economic empowerment, what that means, particularly to black people or just people of color, anybody who's oppressed, who's trying to raise up. It's very, excuse me, very raw, no holds barred, just talking about what needs to be said. So we've gone to about 17 cities in the last 3 months. Everywhere from LA to Atlanta to Louisville, Kentucky, Houston, Kansas City, you name it. So New York was kind of a culmination. And now I'm ready to take a break. I don't know how these artists do all that touring, man, because that stuff wore me out.
Definitely. What prompted you to do the tour?
You know, I wanted to, I feel like your life isn't worth much if you're not spending that time changing something about the way people live, about this world. And if you got a gift that you can share, whether it's knowledge, talent, money, or anything, your obligation is to share that. In fact, that's the key to immortality. When you influence somebody, and let's say it affects the way they raise their kids, well, now you've created an intergenerational tradition that may live long after you're gone. So for me, being a scholar of finance, it is absolutely my obligation to share this with as many black people as will listen. Now, of course, you don't have to be black to be there, but I talk a lot about what's happening with the black community, how we can deal with the wealth gap, and how we can just kind of get to where we want to get to, get off the corporate plantation, and make our lives what we want them to be.
So you've talked about resurrecting Black Wall Street, resurrecting Black Wall Street. Can you speak on that and maybe just real quick for people that don't know, talk about Black Wall Street and what it was a little bit?
Yes. Well, the Black Wall Street Massacre in 1921 was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was basically a situation where you had a group of affluent African Americans who had a community that was prosperous. They kept their money in their community. They created their own jobs. They had some of the best doctors in the world, nicest hotels, etc. They were doing so well, they were doing better than the communities that surrounded them. And, back in that time, lynchings were strong. Racial injustice was huge. So basically, the people in the surrounding town deputized a bunch of white men who literally went into the town and murdered hundreds of people, hundreds of men, incarcerated a lot of the other men, ran the women and children out of town, went house by house and systematically looted the house and burned it to the ground. And then they paid them no money in insurance compensation because the insurance policy didn't cover riots. Mm-hmm. So many of these African Americans who were very, very wealthy, doing really well, many of them died broke. There was no reparations ever paid. And so what we did was we created a film called Resurrecting Black Wall Street with director Dorian Chandler out of New York. She's actually out of the Bronx, to be more specific. And, we just wanted to make sure everybody knew that story because when we were down in Tulsa on the same street where this happened, there were black kids that didn't even know it occurred. And so basically stories like this get buried. It's not just this story that should concern us. It's the fact that there are 1,000 others just like it that nobody knows. So we want to tell this story to anybody who will listen. We believe every child in America, especially every black child, needs to know this story. We also want to resurrect the ideas that led to the creation of this really prosperous community. People talk about the black community like we're just meant to struggle. We're just meant to be broke, meant to be poor. No, poverty is not a persistent state in your life unless you choose for it to be. It can be a transitory state where you go to a better state, but you have to think in a certain way. So we resurrected the ideas that led to the creation of Black Wall Street and said, let's see what we can do 100 years later to do something even better.
Right. Okay. Now, a few weeks ago, Roots was all the rage and everybody was debating over Roots. What are your thoughts on that? Now, I was one of the people, just being honest, I was one of the people that was like, I'm tired of this. I'm sick of it. I need to see Hannibal, Shaka Zulu, something, anything but another slave movie. What are your thoughts on that? As it relates to Black Wall Street, which I would say I would definitely want to see a movie to discuss that act of terror.
Yes. Well, I will say that Hollywood tends to love greenlighting slave movies when it comes to black people. They don't greenlight nothing else, and that's the problem. It's not so much that slave movies in themselves should never exist. It's that there's a lack of diversity, just like what happened with hip hop when everything was gangster, gangster, gangster. You know, it wasn't that hip hop was bad. It was that it was like, well, why not spread it out a little bit? You know, mix the gangster with Tribe Called Quest and Chuck D and all this other stuff that we used to have back in the day. So I think that that's the issue. It's the lack of diversity. And so Roots, we know, is an iconic film, an iconic story. I think that Will Packer was associated with it. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, I have much respect to Will. The man's making his money, doing his thing. There's nothing wrong with him making Roots. But you know, what's next? You know, are we gonna what's the next one? The Butler Part 2? You know, what was that little movie about the maids? The what was it?
The Help.
The Help. Yeah, you know what I mean? I mean, seriously, Driving Miss Daisy meets The Help. I mean, that's kind of what we tend to get out of Hollywood, and I think that there's a reason for that. It's sort of built on this idea that number one, there's kind of this reflection of the idea that I don't think they like seeing black people aggressive or engaging in self-determination. They like to kind of believe that that we're going to be better off if we're subservient, passive, and forgiving. No matter what atrocity you commit against us, no matter how many Holocausts we go through, we always going to line up to forgive you. Like when that white boy went up in the church and shot everybody up, all them stupid Negroes were in church. So I'm like, we forgive you. Why are you breaking your neck to go forgive somebody when he just murdered your relatives? I mean, you can forgive him in private if you want to, after some reflection, but it's almost like you're trying to prove something, like you're trying to get some sort of acceptance and validation from other people, and that's not acceptable. So what I would say is that, you know, generally speaking, the key idea is that black people have to tell our own stories. You see, because, you know, if you are the white guy running Hollywood or the white guys running Hollywood, can you really blame them for telling the stories they want to see the way they want to see them told? And it's really, really interesting that a lot of black stories you know, are not just told from a white perspective, but when you look at the infrastructure of how that story was even created, all the writers will be white, like Straight Outta Compton. When I saw all those white people writing Straight Outta Compton, I'm like, they got black people in Hollywood that know how to write. You know what I mean? Like, really? You couldn't find no black people to write a black story? Seriously?
Especially that one, which a lot of us live that era, you know, we're present and know the details, the nuances, and the subtleties.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was stunned. So I think that we have to sort of understand that we have the ability to kind of shape our destiny a little bit better. The last point I'll make on that, as far as slave movies, is I almost feel like, you know, Hollywood's tendency to want to make movies about either slavery or maybe the civil rights movement, in a way, to me, almost says to us, well, look at how bad things used to be and look at how great things are now. So what are you complaining about? So that's why, you know, you'll have people that will to this day say they love Muhammad Ali, but if you really are a young black man who acts the way Ali did in the 1960s, they're gonna lock your ass up. Your ass ain't getting a job, and they're gonna treat you like shit. So there's a huge, you know, contradiction there. It doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk hip hop. You work. No, you know what? Back up before we get into the Dame, because Dame is coming. But let's talk about hip hop. A lot of what people see you in, a lot of the social media stuff has to deal with your opinion of hip hop. That might even be how we came to be friends. What are your thoughts on hip hop nowadays?
Well, you know what? I believe that anybody. The reason I comment on hip hop is because, number one, I was a black man before I became a professor. And really, if you want to understand black men in America across the board, on average, you got to go through the villages of hip hop and sports. That's just something that's part of our culture. It's something that we excel at, something we should be proud of, but it's something that we overinvest in. We shouldn't overinvest in that, right? But moving on beyond that, as a person who's now in my 40s, I feel that men in our 40s, we have an obligation to be the OGs of the community, because so many fathers were taken out of the home during mass incarceration. So like when I work with guys like Damon Dash, our biggest demographic is black men between the ages of like 23 and 40, because they're looking for that father figure, that guy that can really help them figure out how to be a man in a world that wants a black man to stay as a little boy. So for me, I have an obligation to pay attention to hip hop. That's my favorite genre of music. It's what I listen to all the time. I have an obligation to talk about it in a way that's going to lend itself to critical thinking. Because if you listen to this music and you're allowing somebody to pick away at your subconscious with messages tied onto a beat that makes you more open to suggestion, then you need critical thinking to help you discern between that which you should absorb and that which you should reject. Mm-hmm. So, in that role that I have, it's my obligation to speak on it. It's hard to do, because people get into this demagoguery, if you will, where they think that if you criticize something, oh, you a hater, you hate somebody. So I get in fights with rappers, like that thing with Lil Wayne, in 2013.
Yeah.
People thought I hated hip hop because I was going at Lil Wayne. I was saying, no, I'm not even. I don't even dislike Lil Wayne. I just think that he's a brilliant man that should be using his powers to strengthen the people he loves, not kill them, not destroy them, not commit genocide. Tyler the Creator, another guy, who seems to not be over what happened with us a couple years ago.
You made him lose money,
man.
or lose his deal.
That motherfucker's been mad at me since like 2000 and whatever. I mean, I'm like, wow, dude. I mean, look, you're so much more famous than me. Like, you should have forgotten about me by now. But long story short, even when I look at Tyler, I've studied him, his music, who he is as a person, and I see the brilliance, I see the talent. I also see the pain, when he even talks about his father not being there and things like that. I really wish I could help him with that. I wanted to do that. It just didn't work out that way. And also, when you get into that conflict where you've been pitted against each other, when you should be allies, but corporate America has made you into enemies, then sometimes it's difficult to build that bridge. So he may not build the bridge with me, but I hope he builds it with somebody, because I think artists and athletes are our most powerful and valuable assets in our community. So they should be doing things to lift us up, not tear us down, no matter how much money somebody's paying you to do it.
Is that possible? I've reached out to artists myself personally, a long time ago, Soulja Boy, more recently some others. And then I had a thing with Nicki Minaj, and people hated me for like a week or two. And all I was like, it was real basic. I was just like, hey, my daughter and your music don't match up. My daughter's, young. Is it ever going to be a possible scenario where artists set aside the material, the commercialism, the materialism, and, really the disregard for community? I mean, let's just be honest, and kind of represent the best interest of the people. And there are some that do that, right? Mm-hmm. But it's generally not the ones who are making a lot of money.
Right. I think that most people in entertainment, unfortunately, are trained to be a little bit overly materialistic. You even if you're a deep person, you're encouraged to be more shallow. Even if you're an intelligent person, you're encouraged to be a little more ignorant. And that's a problem. Even when you go back to Marvin Gaye with Motown, his issue with Berry Gordy, he wants to make music that's relevant, and Berry Gordy's like, no, you need to learn the little dance step and sing these stupid little tunes. And Marvin had to have a certain type of courage to fight against that, and he ended up, as a result, becoming the greatest artist Motown produced, in my opinion. The one that's lasted, his legacy's just lasted. It's gonna last forever. And so when I look at hip hop artists today, what I really see is I see a collective of people where some people think a lot like maybe gangsters do, where they respect money and power. That's it. Those are the two things that shape how they view the world. And so what I think has to occur is for them to respect the community must earn that respect. I think there has to be codes of conduct where people say, look, you ain't doing that no more. Yeah. So that to me was why the Lil Wayne thing was so important to me, was because I know that when he lost that however many millions in that Mountain Dew deal, I knew every artist on earth was paying attention. And so to me, it wasn't just me. It was basically the people that I try to represent. It was like walking up to the bully and punching him in his face, saying, you're not going to ignore us no more. You come back, you show some respect. And, so I know that he hasn't made lyrics about Emmett Till like that no more. Right. He's not going to do that. So ultimately, I think that the development of black media, unity within the community in terms of kind of saying, okay, this is where we're going to draw the line. You're not going to make, we're not going to have you going into some, record label owned by Jewish people who would never, by the way, never allow you to say these things to their children. Yeah. But we're not going to let you go on these record labels and call our kids, horrible names, talk about shooting my grandmother up, make jokes about hitting babies with stray bullets and all these things that are very real in our community, because people are capitalizing off of the trauma that we experience. Mm-hmm. So, I think that obtaining that power, having that unity, kind of speaking up, putting pressure on the artist, not in a way that says we hate you, but in a way that says, look, we need you to just kind of remember where you came from, and then we'll support you, we'll buy your albums. I think that works. I think Beyonce and Jay-Z got the message. I think when Jay-Z had that thing with Harry Belafonte, and then a lot of people started coming back, now you see Beyonce showing a little more conscientiousness, and I don't think it's because she became more conscious. I think that we made it easier for her to do that.
Yeah, that was cool because Jay, I wrote a review on his album when that album came out, Magna Carta, and that was like one of my big criticisms. And he still praised the review as being honest and I forget his word was right on or something like that. But I did not like that because Harry's one of our heroes, you know, and I think you're right. I think they've done a lot of great work since then too, like really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, speaking of Jay, let's go right into Dame. Talk about your work with Mr. Dame Dash.
Yeah, that's always a fun conversation, right?
Right.
You know what? Dame and I became friends after that Breakfast Club thing. You know, where Dame did an interview that I guess became iconic because he don't let nobody talk. You know?
Right,
so,
right.
And I deal with it every time we talk. We talk like once every day or two, you know, and so afterward, you know, I did the interview. I remember Charlamagne called me and asked me to talk to kind of translate some of what Dame said, and I think the expectation was that I would come in and kind of dismiss it or undermine it. And I said, well, I'm not really going to undermine it because I think we needed to hear some of that, right? We needed a call to action. We needed a call to manhood, especially among men. Because there a lot of us are out here scared. A lot of brothers just don't understand what they're up against. And sometimes you need a guy the football coach to kind of punch you in the chest, call you a punk, and get you to stand up as a man. And I said I understand Damon Dash because he's a lot like my father was when he was younger. You know, my father the same way. He could be a little bit of an asshole, but was very intelligent, very strong, very determined, very family oriented, etc. But he's not a perfect person either, right? So when we went and did the interview, I just spoke what I thought was the truth, helped kind of take the ideas, refine them so that people would understand what he was trying to say. And then afterwards, somebody hooked us up and said, you guys should meet. I said, okay, cool. So we talked. And the first conversation we had was, he said, first question, he said, well, I don't want to be rude, but, and that's when people usually are about to be rude. When they say, I don't want to be rude. He said, but do you just talk about business or do you actually do business? And that's when I told him, I said, well, actually, I've worked for myself for years. I know how to make my own money. So that's when we started working on projects together. So now we teach a class together called Intelligent Boss Moves at intelligentbossmoves.com, where we talk about how we do business independently, how you raise your own money, how you think about everything from production to marketing to distribution. A lot of people love it. A lot of young people love it who are looking for a different way to find success. Artists love it because we talk a lot about, how he was able to build Rockefeller back when nobody was checking for Jay-Z, but we also talk about value-oriented issues like the importance of building things that you can leave to your children. There's nothing more important to Dame than his kids. Same thing with me. We're both fathers. We're actually a month apart in age too. Wow. So we just have a lot in common. And a lot of people don't expect that because they're like, oh, well, he's from the street and he's in hip hop and you're a professor. But we're both black men who are about the same age, who have very similar value systems. And we're also both educated. We just went to different schools. He went to the School of Life. I went to a university, and it makes for a good combination. So long story short, it's worked really well. We have a movie coming out. Kanye West is the third executive producer on the movie Too Honorable that comes out this summer. So it's going to be a great movie. It's got Murder Mook in it and Cameron, who's a great actor. Was it Smoke Diz and some other people. So, we're just trying to make it work.
What's the movie about?
It's about basically the idea of honor in the street and how in the street you can have people. It's really Dame's story. Dame shot most of it. I came in to kind of help with some other parts of it, but it was built on a story from his OG came home after like 25 years. And it made him reflect on the experiences he had with these guys and how in the street you have, codes of conduct and honorability, if you want to call it that, where you might have a guy who might be a killer, but he's seen as a good guy. Another guy is also a killer. He's seen as a bad guy. But in the eyes of the system, they're all seen as bad guys. They all go to prison. And so ultimately the message that comes out of this, at least this is my interpretation, is that there are really no winners in that game.
Right.
You know, you might think that because I'm honorable and I'm playing this game and I'm playing it the right way and I'm a decent person who's doing the bad things for the right reasons, that it's going to work out for you, but it doesn't. It usually ends up with death or incarceration. So we have the violence, we have all the interesting stuff in there. It's not for kids, but afterward, what we want to do is when we screen it, we want to talk about it so we can make sure the message is clear.
Okay. Talk about Dame and the misconceptions around him. There's people, he's a polarizing figure. There's people that love him. There's people that hate him. What would you say is the biggest thing people get wrong?
I think that the biggest thing people get wrong is that, number one, that he's broke. He's not broke. What he is he's an entrepreneur that can end up cash strapped sometimes. Sometimes you could be very wealthy and have no money at all. Sometimes you could be broke and have lots of money, lots of cash. You understand that. You're an entrepreneur. So people who get paychecks don't understand that. They don't get that. A lot of people that get paychecks, a lot of us don't own anything, whereas he owns a lot of things that are worth millions of dollars. But sometimes what happens is your money runs low because of that. I've been around Dame, been to his house. We've invested in things together. I know he's not broke, but I know sometimes the cash flow is not what it needs to be. The second thing is that I think people have a perception of him kind of being a mindless hothead. He just goes off the handle and can't. He's not very smart. But actually he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. I mean, his brain works like a supercomputer, and I believe that part of the reason he talks so much and so aggressively is because his brain literally is on the next thought before you finish processing the first one. And so I think it's very calculated. I think he understands, Dame Dash mode versus the other mode, and that, to me, I identified that as intelligence. A lot of people think going to school makes you a smart person. I know a lot of dumb people who went to school a long time and a lot of smart people who never went to school. Yeah. He's one of the smart people who got his education elsewhere. So I would say those are the two things that I think people get wrong about him.
Okay,